Islam blames Christians for things which they never believed. One example is the misinterpretation of the phrase Son of God. The followers of Jesus believe in a spiritual way that Jesus is the Son of God and they themselves are the children of God. The Quran in Surah An-Nisa, verse 171 says that it is far from God to have a son. And in Surah Maryam, verses 35, 89, and 91 says that it is evil, disastrous, and monstrous to mention a son for God. Based on these statements of the Quran, and contrary to its true meaning in the Gospel of Jesus Christ, Islamic commentaries interpret the phrase Son of God falsely and call it the slanders of Christians against God. They say that Christians hold the belief that Jesus came to this world as the result of a physical relationship between God and Mary. Nowhere in the Christian Bible is it stated that Jesus was born as the result of a physical relationship between God and Mary. Instead, it says that with the coming of the Spirit of God upon the Virgin Mary, the Spirit became flesh and revealed himself fully in Jesus Christ. The relationship of God and Mary in the Gospel is a spiritual relationship. God does not need a wife and cannot have a worldly relationship with a woman because he is God. Isn't this shocking? Muhammad and Muslim scholars closed their eyes to the true meaning of this phrase in the Gospel, but called Christians insulting and sanctioned Muslims to kill Christians for their own misinterpretation and misunderstanding. That's why every Muslim needs to borrow a gospel from a Christian, read it, and understand personally that Islam's accusation of Christians' beliefs are untrue. Muslims need to know what it means to be called the son or daughter of God and put an end to the 1400 years of Islamic misunderstanding, prejudice, and harsh reaction to Christians and Jewish beliefs. The Surah Maryam in verse 89 and 91 says that to invoke a son for God is a terrible, evil thing. But Surah Az-Zumar in verse 4 says that God can have a son if he desires. If invoking a son for God is evil, why does the Quran itself open a door for people to invoke a son to God? Aren't Muslim scholars able to see this problem in the Quran? They call Christians slanderous for believing that God can have a son. Isn't therefore Surah Az-Zumar slanderous for saying that God can have a son if he desires? On one hand, the Quran in Surah An-Nisa, verse 171 says that God can never have a son. But on the other hand, Surah Az-Zumar in verse 4 says that God can have a son if he desires. Did you get it? Surah Az-Zumar is saying that it is not impossible for God to have a son. Isn't this hypocrisy? On one hand, the Quran says to Christians that God cannot have a son. But on the other hand says to Muslims, yes, if God desires, he can have a son. This is therefore unjust when the Quran itself confirms that God can have a son, but aims to deprive Jews and Christians of this belief. It further instructs Muslims to kill them for having such a belief. It's very unjust. Surah At-Tawbah in verse 29 and 30 says, "Make war upon such of those to whom the scriptures have been given." The Jews say Ezra or Uzair is the son of God, and the Christians say the Messiah is the son of God. I hope you noticed why the Quran does not have any legitimate right to accuse Jews and Christians and fight against them for believing that God can have a son. First, because Christians believe in a spiritual way. Second, the Quran itself says in Surah Az-Zumar that God can have a son. Muslim scholars should therefore be ashamed of themselves for blaming Christians and Jews for spreading false accusations against them everywhere. They need to apologize to Jews and Christians. Muslim writers will not be able to reflect a true view of Christianity unless they read the Gospel. They need to leave the traditional restrictions of Islam behind and read the Gospel and the commentaries over the words of the Gospel in order to be able to understand Christians' approach to the sonhood of Jesus Christ.